Our 15, so I am thrilled to get started. I'll just kick this off. I'm Jody Hoffer Gittell from the Heller School at Brandeis, and this session is building multi-stakeholder collaboration in elementary, secondary, and post-secondary education. So the motivation for this session is that there's a growing recognition in education as elsewhere that collaborative relationships among stakeholders play a key role in achieving desired outcomes. And in education, socio-emotional learning is increasingly recognized as a desired outcome for students. So we think research on how we develop social connections is going to be critical to informing successful interventions in the education space. And evidence from neuroscience has shown that connections among people in everyday life help to shape the neural connections through which cognition occurs. And so our learning depends not only on what we're learning in the classroom, but also on the strength of our social networks and the strength of the social context in which we are learning. So this session, we're thrilled to have presenters who will talk about building collaboration in the education context from K through 12, the whole way up through graduate education. We expect that strong networks among teachers, administrators, staff, parents, and other key stakeholders could result in higher performing students who become productive, impactful citizens, as well as more engaged teachers and staff who have personally better outcomes as workers in the system. So that's kind of an underlying hypothesis that we're exploring here, and we'll tackle it from multiple angles. Thrilled to have, first of all, just recognize Abigail Sherburne is here as a technical facilitator, and she'll be monitoring the chat. So please add your comments, questions, thoughts there, and we'll come back to them after Gittell has given her discussant remarks. Our first, we have 4 presenters, as in the last session. We've got Lauren Hajjar from Suffolk, Monica Higgins from Harvard, and Lainie Loveless from Brandeis presenting first, and then Liam Honigsberg from Brandeis presenting second, Elli Meleti from the University of Glasgow. Oh, I'm sorry, moving then to Cady, Landa. I may have these the sequence wrong. Cady, Landa, Institute for Community Inclusion will be presenting second, then Liam from Brandeis, and we'll end with Elli Meleti from the University of Glasgow. Our facilitator, our discussant Gittell Shah from the American Federation of Teachers will then give some remarks, and we'll then open it up for discussion. So with that, I'm thrilled to hand it over to Lauren Hajjar.
Thank you. All right. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So I'm presenting today on behalf of our team with some of the findings from a mixed methods study within a school district in Massachusetts that implemented a personalized learning curriculum, and the study was funded by the Nellie Mae Education Foundation. So by way of background, we know expectations of public schools have changed, and this was happening before COVID-19. Certainly it's more relevant today. And in many public schools, there has been, across the country, a singular or narrow focus on academic achievement, accompanied by a growing emphasis on accountability through testing. And that has raised many concerns from stakeholders about students' needs and potentials that can't be addressed through academic learning alone. So, supported by a growing body of research, there's been an interest in student-centered approaches to learning, and that's expected to support a broader range of outcomes, including greater college and career readiness, socio-emotional learning, problem solving, etc. One type or approach to student-centered learning is personalized learning. And this is the intervention that is of interest in this study. There are many definitions of personalized learning, but for the purposes of this project, we are using the MAPLE definition. MAPLE is a Massachusetts-based organization, and part of what they do is provide schools with resources and tools needed to successfully implement personalized learning. So they emphasize that personalized learning is tailoring the instructional environment, and importantly, that technology is a necessary tool to implement personalized learning effectively. To effectively transition from traditional models of education to personalized approaches, it does require certain conditions. So we believe that it needs to be supported by a set of systems, structures, and culture in order to flourish. So we've learned about the importance of these structures in other contexts, such as healthcare, for instance. So this slide is just showing a few recent tweets that really capture that and talk about personalized learning needed in an environment where relationship building and trust form the foundation of what happens in the classroom. And as in addition to highlighting that technology is a tool that supports education, not a quality education in and of itself. So in our study, we looked specifically at 2 organizational factors that we believe are related to one another and that appear to be related and important factors in the successful implementation of personalized learning. And those 2 factors are felt accountability and relational coordination. Felt accountability first is an organizational construct and is defined here as the collective beliefs people in an organization have about the extent to which workers feel accountable for organizational level goals as opposed to their own individual level goals. Relational coordination is also an organizational construct and theory, and that's been validated and tested in multiple industries. It's this mutually reinforcing process of high quality relationships and communication that predict desired outcomes. RC has 7 dimensions. 3 are relational, shared goals, shared knowledge, mutual respect, and 4 are communication. In this study, we looked at relational coordination within and between roles in one school within a district. And so that's represented here on the map. You can see the various roles in the network map. The idea is that the stronger the RC between the roles, the more successful the organization tends to be in executing its core processes. So in this case, personalized learning is the core process. We set out to study the change process of the implementing personalized learning and evaluate the relationship between relational coordination, felt accountability, and personalized learning. We used a mixed methods pre-post intervention design, and we collected both quantitative and qualitative data. Our quantitative data included survey data that captured RC, felt accountability, and personalized learning, and our qualitative methods included structured interviews, semi-structured interviews, excuse me, focus groups, and field observations. So I'm kind of going to go quickly through my results, our results. Survey data using validated measures were used to analyze the relationship. So we have 3 mediation regression models that were developed and tested. And in the first model, we tested whether felt accountability predicted the dependent variable personalized learning. And in fact, it did. It was highly significant. In our second model, felt accountability significantly predicted relational coordination. In this case, relational coordination was a mediator variable. And then in the third model, we tested whether the mediator RC and felt accountability predicted personalized learning. And in fact, they did. And what we see here is that when both RC and felt accountability are included in the model, felt accountability becomes a less significant predictor of personalized learning. Thus, we draw a conclusion that felt accountability impacts personalized learning by increasing relational coordination with others. One thing I'll note about model 2 is that there was variation between work groups. And I can say more about that in the discussion. Several themes emerged from our qualitative analyses. At a broad level, there was a general lack of clarity around personalized learning. So participants kind of talked throughout the year about different understandings of personalized learning and how to integrate it into the curriculum. Strong emphasis on technology, but not really understanding how to integrate technology into all subject areas. A need for more collaboration time and curiosity about resources and training to support personalized learning. And an important finding from the RC data was that there was consistently a high level of respect, mutual respect, within and between work groups, and a great appreciation for their students. So I will just wrap up with making 3 points here. The first is that, RC and felt accountability as organizational factors appear to be important in supporting personalized learning. Implementation patient efforts show that personalized learning may be best supported by specific conditions. And two of those are RC and felt accountability. And then finally, and certainly in light of COVID-19 and current remote learning efforts, it will be important to conduct more research in this area and specifically understand the relationship between organizational factors of RC, felt accountability, and maybe others, and student level outcomes.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lauren. And I think with that, we turn it over to Cady Landa. And Cady, take it away. Wonderful to have you. Cady, you might be on mute.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great.
Nice job.
Okay. Co-production is a process in which staff and client work together to decide what should be done and how best to do it. Oops. Okay. Relational co-production is characterized by staff and client having mutual respect for one another, sharing knowledge, developing goals together, and communicating well enough to best accomplish their shared work process. In the case of elementary schools, co-production applies to the relationship between school staff and students' parents. Their shared work process is the students' education and development. Relational co-production is different from the more bureaucratic relationship we typically see in schools, in which the staff-parent relationship is more of a professional to layperson relationship, with the parent positioned as a more peripheral participant in the work process. In public pre-K through 12 education, the quality of parent participation is an important factor shaping the quality of services that are delivered to each student. However, systems rarely address inequities in the resources that parents have to participate. I performed a mixed method study that looks at the access of children of immigrants in elementary school to special education entitlements and other school services addressing needs of students having difficulty. A quantitative analysis uses Massachusetts administrative data and controls for other correlates of special education participation and placement, and finds for students in grades K through 5 that children of immigrants are significantly less likely than children of US-born parents to receive special education, and that when they do participate in special ed, children of immigrants are significantly less likely than children of US-born parents to be in inclusive placements and significantly more likely to be in substantially separate settings. A companion case study of a Massachusetts elementary school generalizes to theory to explore the how and why of the findings of the quantitative analysis. In the case study, I used Brafenbrenner's ecological framework, relational coordination, and relational bureaucracy theories, and Alba and Nee's theory of immigrant adaptation to shape data collection and analysis, and explore how public policies and school organizational structure affect the response of the school to the students and the experiences of the immigrant parents navigating for their children. I draw my data from document review and in-depth semi-structured interviews with the principal, parents, and school staff, serving each of 11 students whose parents immigrated to the US after age 16, had low income, and whose school performance was the object of parental concern. I found that public policies, district and school organizational structure, and constrained resources combined to compromise the ability of school staff to meet the needs of the study students, children of immigrants, in a timely way. The major public policy obstacle was the absence of policy to integrate immigrants and provide the infrastructure needed by immigrant parents to access complex service systems for their children. Several features of the school's organizational structure were obstacles in staff response to the needs of the study students, including an overall orientation to providing services to groups rather than to individual students, insufficient structure to support the coordination of staff regarding individual students, structures that siloed general education, special education, and ELL staff, and insufficient structures for staff coordination with parents. The weak structures for staff coordination with parents were even weaker for immigrant parents because they were not supplemented by structures to regularly provide the language access and systems knowledge needed by the parents to participate effectively on behalf of their children. While other policy and implementation factors were also at play, these weaker staff-parent coordination factors for immigrant parents played a large role in contributing to the outcomes of my quantitative analysis. Parents did not know that a special education program existed, that they could request an evaluation of their child, or that staff were concerned that their child might have a disability. Parents had not been informed in a way they could understand that their child had a right to a least restrictive placement. Unaided by orientation for newcomers, check-ins for understanding, or language translation and interpretation, the immigrant parents in my study faced significant challenges navigating school for their children. The parents, who had grown up in another country, lacked familiarity with US school systems. They faced language barriers. They were not fully informed of their child's context and experience at school. They were not informed of the way the school system worked or of special school programs that could help their child. They did not have friends or family who had experience with navigating for a child with significant difficulty and were unsure of acceptable behavior for parents in schools. Together, results of the quantitative analysis and the case study indicate how impactful the staff-parent relationship is on the elementary school experience of the child. They indicate two things. Schools should value and make possible relational co-production between staff and parents, and schools should undertake proactive steps to make sure all parents can participate in co-production. In the case of immigrant parents, this requires school structures that provide to these parents at a minimum the language and access and systems knowledge they need to participate on behalf of their child. Building their cultural and social capital would also be very helpful. My study confirms Jacobson and Anderson's theory, the distributional consequences of co-production, that states that in contexts in which clients play an impactful role in shaping the quality and outcomes of services, such as education, there is a danger that unequal resources for participation among clients will, if not remedied, have the effect of widening disparities among those served. To avoid this widening of disparities in education or other services sensitive to the quality of co-production, it is important to analyze the impact of co-production on service quality and outcomes, understand the competencies and resources required for effective co-production, look for differences in the capacity to co-produce among those served that could result in inequitable service quality and outcomes, and address these inequities by building the capacity of co-producers who are under-resourced to participate. That's it.
Okay, perfect timing, Cady. Thank you so much. And this is going to be fascinating to think how this plays out with all the in the pandemic, with all the schooling from home and the need for co-production and what's happening to inequity as a result. So I'm sure we'll come back to that later. And so we've really heard now about collaboration among teachers and staff, about collaboration between teachers, staff, and parents, or lack thereof. And now we're moving to Liam Honigsberg, also from Brandeis University, to speak about collaboration. And I say also because Lauren is a graduate and so is Cady, but they're at their own institutions now. But Liam will talk about collaboration in the process of training teachers. So take it away, Liam.
Thanks, Jody. Y'all can hear me okay?
Indeed.
Great. Thanks, Cady and Lauren, for the lead. Hey, everyone who's out there. I am going to be talking to you about a model for teacher training, as Jody just mentioned. really with a question in mind of how do we design programs or services or partnerships or improvement initiatives here in the public education space that are designed for collaboration, for relational coordination, especially in a cross-organizational capacity. So some of you may know this idea of outside organizations partnering with schools and districts to offer support or training is becoming increasingly frequent. There's a little literature on these things called intermediaries that are defined as an organization that occupies the space in between at least two other parties. So I'm going to be speaking to one example of those in particular. Figured I'd start and give you a little framing on why I care. Maybe not why you care, but maybe I'll try to sell you on that. This was the school where I got started teaching in Phoenix, Arizona. And the people at the College of Education who taught me how to teach never set foot anywhere near this place. And so there was this disconnect in my experience between what I was learning off-site and what actually was happening to me in my apprenticeship. You know, there's a couple 100,000 teachers a year that we train here, and we spend a lot of money, a few $1 billion at least doing that. So there's a lot at stake here to trying to get this right, not to mention the impact on teachers and the students that they work with. So there's a new model that's come out that's increasing in its popularity. It's called a teacher residency. And the idea is sort of taken from the medical residency model where you ask someone to apprentice in this way, in a way more hands-on manner than the old model of student teaching and offsite training. And you do this for a year, and in so doing, you have much more exposure to the classroom, to the experience, better training. And there's some early data suggesting that you stay in the field longer and that it's easier to recruit a more diverse class and retain a more diverse class of novice teachers. And potentially even these teachers are more effective with their students in seeing them to academic achievement. I'm going to show you a slide next that's messy. And it's messy because it's my best attempt, and I haven't figured out how to do this well yet, to model what this looks like from the network perspective of the resident. And this is where I'm interested. And there's going to be a lot of colors and dots between different roles, and it's a mess. All right, hopefully I gave you enough preamble that it's not overwhelming. I tried to color code this in a few ways, and I'll love your feedback. There's a few different organizations that kind of exist here. There's a university, a teaching site, that's here in orange. Well, they're different oranges, yikes. Oh, my aesthetic is failing me. There's a university here. There's a professor offsite where students are taught and licensed. There's a mentor teacher that the resident is actually paired up with in the school, and a principal who also serves at the school site. And then at the district level, there is an advisor or coach who often floats from school to school to give coaching to teachers. And the resident is here in the middle. I've said that they have multiple affiliations because they don't really belong to any one of these groups. They belong to all of them. And I've also tried to push their circle closer to the mentor because it seems like that's where they spend the most time. But this is messy, as I said, and I've done qualitative interviews to find out sort of what is the experience like. Here's a resident speaking to not knowing who's at the university and who's at the district when they're getting professional development. They don't actually know the difference. They go off-site and it's all confusing to them. Here's a professor saying, my residents are scared of doing their work for me because it's taking them away from the classroom where the principal wants them working. And then here's a district advisor saying, we're very invested in this and we want everyone to know it. So there's a lot going on here. These are all folks from the same program too. So that tells you a little about what the resident experience must feel like. So where I'm going with this is trying to get to the heart of what are we gonna do to strengthen the collaboration across this network? What can we do about that and in this cross-organizational context? So I've been looking at two kinds of data. One is data from the Relational Coordination Survey, where we've asked folks in these networks, the egocentric resident network, to score one another across those 7 RC dimensions. And the other is looking at outcome data for teacher performance. How are they actually improving? And so to cut to the chase, what I'm finding in the analysis that I've done is that there's this correlational chain that's emerging, where the closer the strength of tie between the resident and their mentor, that's the person who they're working most closely with, the stronger the RC for the network as a whole. Suggesting that this dyad, the strength of tie between those two, predicts the strength of coordination across the network. Maybe arguing that there's a boundary span or role relationship here between mentor and resident that sort of distributes collaboration across the other organizational players in this model, and that overall predicts their performance on the observation rubric as well, and their improvement as a teacher. And so what I've taken away from this, if we want to make an improvement on the outcomes, suggests that what we would want to do is nurture this relationship here so that we can strengthen the RC across the network and then improve the teacher's performance by virtue of that. That's my time. Looking forward to talking more.
Great. Let's see, 4 seconds left. Whoa, you guys have this internal clock going here. Well done. Yeah, really interesting, Liam. Thank you for sharing. These results are kind of evolving. So it seems like every time I hear there's something new. Liam is in the middle of his dissertation, so that's an exciting place to be. I'd love to turn it over now to Elli Meleti, who just is at the very final stages of her dissertation at University of Glasgow, and she'll be talking about the collaboration in the university between program staff and their kind of higher status, higher power colleagues, and the impact on staff well-being that comes from that. So Elli, take it away.
Thank you, Jody. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Good afternoon. My topic is a cycle of human sustainability, relational coordination, and worker outcomes in higher education. Sustainability is a broad concept, difficult to define, and the Academy of Management, as well as the United Nations with the Agenda 2030, talked about it. However, sustainability focuses more on physical rather than human resources. But companies and their management practices have profound negative effects on human beings and their social environment. The workplaces are often toxic environments, and so there is a great need for human sustainability. There is also a great need for human sustainability in higher education. Higher education institutions in the UK and worldwide are under constant pressure to perform. They're obliged to face competition internationally. They have new technological systems to adjust, lower funding, a greater number of students, a great increase in administration tasks, restructuring, which is not always working, and a lot of stress for both academic and non-academic staff, which disturbs their work-life balance as well as their health. We talk about it all the time. Take the person out of the job and just make them a number. That is how we feel now. In the past, we were treated like human beings. We were considered when decisions were made. That top 5% who make all the decisions don't care about the people who are doing the job. It's all just about money. It's quite sad. A program administrator was talking. The voice of the people is not heard. Things are already decided. An academic talks here. I define human sustainability based on Kantian ethics as follows. Human sustainability is when organizations respect the human beings as free, rational, and responsible. include them in policy formulation and decision-making, and encourage them to build mutual respect with all persons within and beyond their organizations. Relational coordination focuses on coordination that occurs through high-quality communication, supported by relationships of shared goals, shared knowledge, and mutual respect, enabling organizations to better achieve their desired outcomes. It focuses on relationships between roles, and it's very successful both for normal conditions and unexpected events and crises. The study explains how the personal transformation of employees can be facilitated and take place through the implementation of the proposed human sustainability definition. It contributes in this way to the theory of relational coordination, and it legitimizes the sector of human sustainability by theorizing, defining, and presenting a framework, the cycle of human sustainability, which can be applied to all stakeholders and other interests as well beyond the higher education. The study examines a large, well-known university in the United Kingdom. It's a case study qualitative research. It involves 4 schools from 4 different colleges, including administrators, academics, and other staff, and asks, how does design for human sustainability affect relational coordination? How do human sustainability and relational coordination affect work engagement, proactive work behavior, and job satisfaction of employees? It presents this framework, the cycle of human sustainability. It starts with the designing for human sustainability. So if we adapt this definition proposed, then we create human sustainability practices. And in this way, the positive direction of the cycle of human sustainability starts. This increases relational coordination practices, which facilitate the positive personal transformation of employees, which increases worker outcomes and facilitates the positive organizational and social transformation. On the contrary, if we don't design for human sustainability, we have absence of human sustainability practices, which means that there is a decrease in relational coordination, a decrease in the positive personal transformation. It does not facilitate the positive personal transformation of employees, which decreases their worker outcomes and does not facilitate the positive organizational and social transformation. General findings are that people don't have a voice in decision making. There is a fear of expression. Autonomy and flexibility are limited. Frontline promotion is non-existent, and shared goals but mutual respect are not always present. Shared knowledge is rarely present. There is an extreme workload for all and a lot of stress and health problems. There are more specialized tasks for frontline staff, which decreases their job satisfaction. And there is also a trend for less job security. Overall, there is a low level of human sustainability in the university, which has a limited positive influence on relational coordination, especially between functions. The low levels of human sustainability and relational coordination have a limited positive influence on the positive personal transformation of employees, which in turn has limited positive influence on their work engagement, proactive work behavior, and job satisfaction. Concluding, the study indicates how organizations can help their people positively transform themselves and become better employees. It legitimizes, theorizes, and defines the field of human sustainability, providing a framework for the design of human sustainability, but also enhancing the other sectors like the environmental sustainability or ecological sustainability. It enhances the literature of work engagement, proactive work behavior, job satisfaction. It is a multi-level analysis. And last but not least, it provides information and ideas for managers regarding frontline employees, practices that work, the harm of fear and abuse, the significance of respect, and a moral way of thinking and relating. It also explains to managers that although profit is not neglected, it's not the priority. Thank you very much for listening.
Okay, thank you, Elli. That's brings us to the conclusion of our presentations and on our journey from K through 12 education through the training of teachers to other university contexts. So thank you so much. And I'm thrilled to introduce Gittell Shah from the American Federation of Teachers to hear what kind of questions or comments she might want to offer.
Great. Thank you, Jody. Let me just make sure I'm off mute. Great.
Thank you. Just stop sharing, then we'll all see each other again.
Yeah, I'm trying. All right. Yeah.
Great. Nice to see everyone. Thank you, Jody. And I will be very quick because I actually have a question that I definitely want to ask that Jody alluded to earlier. But very quickly, like Jody said, I'm with the AFT, and the reason I feel like I have been participating with several of you in these presentations over the past few years is because I run our community schools work at the AFT nationally, and fundamental, as you all know, to community schools are partnerships and collaboration, whether it be teacher among teacher, parents, teachers, parents, community. And it really fits into our 4 pillars that we think are foundational to public education, which is promoting children's health and well-being, supporting powerful learning, building the capacity of our educators, but also our families. And the bottom line is collaboration and multi-stakeholder collaboration, pre-K through higher education. And community colleges have for years, including private universities, been partners with K-12 education. And what community schools are really trying to do is leverage those partnerships more and more. And community colleges tend to do that a little more naturally sometimes because they are living within the community. The students are from that community often. And then the other piece is the labor management collaboration. That's also another piece of the work that I manage here at the AFT. And we know that even in the community schools world, for a community school to be highly functioning, which addressing the needs so that the kids can learn, there needs to be a strong sort of relationship and collaboration, active collaboration, not just saying, yes, I vote no, but really a meaningful, authentic partnership between the local union affiliates and their district partners. And what I have over the past few years done is sort of make it a triangle that you need not just the labor and the management, but you need the families and community to be a part of that decision making. Cady, as you mentioned, right? How are we going to do that? And then finally, what I want to say is all of my big question, and right now for us, we're grappling obviously with this, is what does K-12 education specifically look like in the next 6 to 12 months? It was like a light switch went off really quickly, and Friday they ended, Monday all the kids and teachers and administrators are figuring out how to actually continue learning. And so what does it look like during the pandemic, which is not ending anytime soon? But and I'll put in the chat box after I'm done, our reopening plan that we put out, I think last month, the AFT, and it's how do you safely reopen schools and society? So it goes through K-12, but we've also addressed higher education as well. And for the K-12 piece, community schools, which we know can leverage their multiple community partners and other stakeholders. How do we use that model to actually rethink education and use what we know are strengths in the community, in public education, where there is a strong stakeholder collaboration. So I will put that in the chat box if you haven't seen it already. But my question to all of you is really, Lauren, like how does the relationship and relational and communications aspect, how does it change? I mean, you've done the research and you're looking at it, but and you probably need more time to think about this and maybe do more research, but what can that or should that look like? And what needs to be tweaked based on what you've learned when they're in the school building, but for the future of whatever education is going to look like.
Meaning in the context of the pandemic, what might have to change?
Yes, sorry, Jody. Context
I
of
mean, I have some very specific thoughts about that. I wouldn't say it's research based, but it is actually based in what I believe is a model of co-production between schools and communities. And I would say that, you know, anecdotally in my own district, I have three kids, two of them in public school, K through 12 setting. There was a missed opportunity after this COVID-19 shutdown to collect data from parents and families and caregivers about what are the current challenges, what are your needs, and there was a lot of assumptions made and decisions made without sort of the really recognizing that parents were not in a supportive role anymore. Parents were actually the teachers for some period of time, when caregivers were actually delivering education, whereas so this idea of role clarity really didn't come up in any circles that I was in, certainly in higher ed, or I'm in my own district, co-chair for the Special Education Parent Advisory Council. And there was just a missed opportunity for data collection to inform how you might engage with families and communities differently. And, you know, in my conversations with colleagues, that seems to be happening, at least in Massachusetts, more broadly. I can't speak for outside of the Commonwealth, but I would love for my colleagues to chime in on this too. Monica, Lainie, Jody, feel free.
Lainie's actually had direct experience as a parent doing this, and so has Monica. So please, mine are all grown up, so I won't.
Lainie, go ahead, and then I'll chime in.
So we live west of Boston. We were technologically supported. So the kids had one-to-one devices. So that piece, the situation was in place. The teachers were supportive. They adjusted their plans very quickly. What we didn't have, and some of our students in our town who attend our town schools live in Boston as well, the logistics were not in place. And it reminded me very much of what happened in healthcare. You come into a setting and you expect to have your protective gear, and it's not there. Then what? And it felt like the rug was pulled out. The same thing with the kids with the technology and the access to learning. They had a computer in many cases, but they didn't have access. They couldn't walk in the door. And then what? You know, all this other great plans and the great curricula that were developed didn't matter because they couldn't open the door. And that's where we were, figuring out that first step, taking 10 steps back.
Monica?
Two things just to support. I mean, it's the time for relational coordination is now. And it's, I think, at all different levels. So a lot of Jody's work and colleagues' work has been at the system level. I had a doctoral student who just graduated who talked about teacher relational self-efficacy. So self-efficacy, your competence in your ability to develop relationships. So interesting. She's done all this research, and it turns out that her name is Callie Robinson. She's going to be joining the faculty at Brown. But she's done so many different papers, and it turns out the teachers don't necessarily have relational self-efficacy. They're trained in how do we teach, you know, math and early literacy and all that sort of thing. And in fact, so my second daughter, and Jody has a daughter too, who's in the profession, she teaches in Bridgeport, Connecticut. So all of her students are free and reduced lunch kids. Many students don't speak English as their primary language. And she, in her context, let's just say there was an administrator somewhere in the system who told her that relationships were actually not what she was supposed to be focusing on. She was supposed to be focusing on the content. Yes. And so I just think that, like, it's, and this probably will get to Liam, like, what are we training? We now need to, we actually have to pay attention to this. It's so, so critical. And anyway, so I'll just stop there. There's so much more I could say, but I think now's the time.
Can I just add one thing to the really quick Monica said about the relationships and how do we teach that? Like, it just makes my head hurt hearing what that administrator said. And it unfortunately happens all too often, right? One of the things, or one of the strategies that we support and advocate for as much as we possibly can with districts is a parent-teacher home visit model, where the educators go in pairs. Because sometimes you just don't feel comfortable going alone if you've never had the train, like, you know, if you've never built a relationship with, you know, the parents or family or sibling of a student, or you're not from that same neighborhood, right? And so there's just so many different dimensions to obviously making it safe and productive for both the family as well as the educators. But when you speak to educators after they go on these relational visits, it just changes the way they teach. Not the nuts and bolts of teaching, but how they're engaging and connecting with the students. I mean, I'm preaching to the choir here, but that is one strategy that we just really like to push when districts are open to allowing that to happen.
Well, in the meantime, they have to connect. So a lot of times my daughter's trying to connect with the parent to get to the kid, and then the parent doesn't necessarily speak English. I mean, it's so complicated now, but
Yeah.
so important.
Others who want to jump in, I know we had some comments in the chat from Justin and Robert, and we welcome thoughts from anyone. And I know Gittell has more as well. So, Robert, I see you there, maybe unmuting. Please feel free to share your question.
Yes, I just had a question. Been hearing a lot of things. I work in Ohio about parents looking to be able to continue online learning, whether it be from a ease perspective, whether it be from a health and safety perspective, whether it be health and safety from the perspective of the pandemic or health and safety as it relates to other issues. What are people hearing about whether or not there's going to be, to any degree, a continuation of parents desiring this form of learning?
Anyone feel like they're in a position to talk about that? Seems Gittell maybe the most, given you are AFT. I don't know if you've.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're asking is if parents feel comfortable continuing sort of teaching from home. Is that what the question is? And
well, it's not necessarily so much teaching from home, but moving to online education being provided by charter schools.
Right. So actually one sort of opportunity, if you will, that has come from this is that parents do not want that to happen. They are, and I say opportunity in terms of, the people who want to privatize aren't getting sort of the traction that potentially could have been for them. Parents overwhelmingly, and I don't have the survey, in front of me, but they want, I think NEA did the survey actually of last month, and if I can find it, I'll post it in the chat box, but parents want to send their kids back to school, meaning with real people in front of them in a classroom type setting, whatever that classroom type setting can look like moving forward. So one of the things, and a lot of, as you can imagine, districts are grappling with, well, there's going to be sort of ebbs and flows of opening schools and closing them when they get, even if it's for a day or two after a new positive COVID case happens and they have to sanitize the whole building, that there's going to have to be some sort of blended learning, meaning, having staggered schedules. So that there's fewer kids even when the schools are open in the classroom. So, because parents, to answer your question, want their kids to go back into buildings and not have the online stuff, because I think it was Lainie who mentioned that the access piece is huge. And if just because you have one computer, well, if you have 3 siblings and maybe an adult who is taking night class, it's not feasible for so many families to be as plugged in and connected.
One thing I've heard, and it's anecdotal, but it's been very consistent in the news and in personal conversations, is that this experience has brought to recognition a new appreciation by parents of how much teachers actually do. My niece, for example, says they should be paid $1 million a year, because she had always loved teachers but didn't realize how much they actually are doing until they had to do it themselves. And I noticed that in some of the Scandinavian countries, the first priority they have when reopening is to open their schools and preschools, in part because it's a it's an equalizing experience, and it's a place where kids who might be new to the culture are going to become introduced to the culture so they can become future citizens, right? So they see it as a huge priority to get the public schools up and running in order to have a positive, social outcome down the road. But I'd love to open it up to others who are.
I want to add to that, Jody, if you don't mind. I want to point out something that I think is important. What parents are doing right now is not homeschooling. And this is not really what you would do if you were actually homeschooling your child. Parents largely are trying to keep their jobs if they still have them, and they are multitasking. And so at any point in time right now, as I speak, I could have a 4-year-old walking in here asking me a question. And so this is the reality of what parents, we're not homeschooling. I mean, and so I think that's just an important thing to note. We're just, and I think the other piece that I wanted to just share is that the school district that I shared, that we studied in, I had a follow-up conversation with them. One of their administrators was a guest speaker in my class last week. And I asked them, what is happening with personalized learning since COVID-19? And his response was, it derailed us in a major way. And there's all sorts of issues. And they were better set up because they had the technology and infrastructure. But to Lainie's point, there were all kinds of barriers to really just accessing. And then, beyond that, I think, in the special education field in and of itself, there's a whole host of other challenges to this. So I just will share that. And but I think the silver lining, I think we are learning a lot about how we can leverage technology and supplement technology. And so, let's say you have, I've been in circles where they're talking about a whole host of models hybrid models that Gittell has already mentioned. So it could be beneficial in some ways at some point to some people. And I think we don't know, right?
Allison, I see you chatted, and I wonder if you want to share anything on this, and then I'd love to go to Justin, who did share something in the chat box earlier as well. Allison?
Hi there, sorry. I just wanted to say, Lauren, you're speaking, I have 3 kids, one of them a little bit older, I think, maybe than the age you're talking about, but just getting through at the moment is kind of where it's at for us. I just wanted to kind of underline and say thank you for saying that.
Lauren's been blogging on this. I think it resonates with a lot of people. Justin?
Yeah, sure. These are all great presentations, really interesting stuff. So I do a ton of work in labor management partnership within K-12 education, specifically in New Jersey. And so I'm wondering, we've talked a lot about, structures of education and teachers, but maybe if we can just expand on what you think, even if you might not see it specifically in this research that you presented, and maybe Gittell, you could speak to this too. What do you see as the role of teachers' unions in this? And then what I'm also really interested in the context of collaboration within schools is, and you mentioned it, but like the boards, obviously the representative of the community, and public education is supposed to be this democracy. We can debate if that's actually true or not. But what do you think the board's role and the teachers' union role is in these types of issues?
So just for clarification, the role of teachers' unions in which of these issues? All of them, or?
Yeah, all I'd say all of them. I know that's a difficult issue in and of itself, but or take your pick. I would just like to hear more about their role in any of this.
Yeah. So really, I know I'm going to be mindful of time, but really in terms of the role in all of them, honestly, the one thing I can say is, for at least for AFT and NEA, as the education unions, is that the bargaining table is where we have been pushing, whether it's the parent-teacher, like relational we don't call it relational coordination, but the relationship stuff, the code, the decision-making, having the parents at the table or the families at the table, the community partners. We're using the collective bargaining, our contracts, as that sort of way to bring it in to the process, right? And so community schools is just one example, but we call it bargaining for the common good. So in St. Paul,
right.
Wow.
You guys all know that, right? So I would say, just as a quick answer, that's what we're using, or how we're engaged, rather.
That is really powerful. I've heard that from you in previous years, but every time I hear it, it makes me so happy.
I'm glad it keeps going, right? It could have happened once and then stopped, but I'm glad it keeps going.
Exactly. Yeah, my mother-in-law was one of these people involved in the Ocean Hill-Brownsville case back in New York, where she was stepping in to kind of support the communities to being more powerful in their local schools. And it was not supported at that time by the teachers union.
Yeah.
She would be so happy to see what's happening right now. Yeah. Bonnie, anything from you? Christine, I'm looking at our other Jessica Santos. Any of you want to jump in, or our panelists? We have 5 more minutes, and so I'll just pause and see who wants to speak.
I just say, Justin, to your point about boards, I just think there needs to be more work on this. So you probably know this, but across the country, there are very different roles for boards. So in Chicago, their local site councils, they have the ability to hire and fire principals. And actually, very interestingly, the area instruction officers, which is kind of an area superintendent role, which a lot of the major urban districts have that kind of role, all they can do is coach their board. They have no legitimate authority. So it varies wildly. So managing and working with the board is another component probably in Liam's network, and Gittell certainly knows that. Having family representation can be positive, but then the problem with education often is people say, oh, well, I grew up this way, or these are way. I mean, it's kind of me search, you know, they think they understand the system because they grew up a certain way, and it actually can get in the way of understanding serious issues around, say, equity, for example, and privilege.
I wonder, Liam, if you want to speak regarding the role of teacher training here, or maybe that's not the best segue, but it would be interesting to think, well, that's, I mean, Monica's actually addressing a much bigger structural issue right now, but I don't know if you have any thoughts.
Some of the residents I talk to see themselves as the boundary spanner. I ask them whose job it is to connect the dots across all these organizations, and they say, well, I think it's mine. It's my job to do that because I'm the one in touch with everyone, and I tell them what I'm doing. And then there's structural pieces, like sometimes they have a prep period at the same time as their mentor so that they have more time with them. Or they're, you know, there's other structural changes. I think, like, you know, as we've operationalized great teaching, it's in the stand and deliver. That's really what it distills down to. You know, how well can you stand in front of a room of kids and teach to a lesson plan that you designed ahead of time with an objective that's in agreement with some state standard? And what we're seeing in the pandemic here is something way beyond that, right? It has nothing to do with how well you can do in real time. It has to do with how well you engage in all these other efforts that we're calling collaboration or RC. And that's just what's showing up for me here in this conversation.
Any move toward teaching relational efficacy in these teacher training programs, or role modeling it perhaps?
Not that I've seen. I've asked people, I've talked to directors of these programs, and they say, there's a great idea. We should think about that. But it's not, I mean, it's a triage, and what I've seen of, you know, where do you begin? And usually it's with, let's manage the classroom so that you don't get eaten alive on day one, and kids stay quiet so you can talk. That's usually what I see. It's not how well you're going to interact with the key stakeholders that represent the class, including students and their families and beyond.
Yeah. Cady, I don't know if we want, maybe you could speak to this in our last couple of minutes. I mean, thinking about the kids that you work with, how are they doing in this? Yeah, anything you want to share?
Well, a couple of things. I think what Lauren said about the opportunity and the need to collect data is very, very important. And I would just add to that you know, who the data is collected from is very important. I would include students, particularly at the middle and high school level. And then there's the whole issue of, you know, language translation and interpretation that we have, and income and access to the internet, that we have to make sure that we're not, you know, leaving out the most vulnerable people, which is often done, and that it's important to include also a wide variety of perspectives and even formulating the questions that will be asked in the data collection. And the other thing that I thought that Gittell brought up about community schools is that I think that now there's even a more intense need to connect community service organizations with schools to really, provide supports to families and students, even more so than before. And before there was a huge need for that too. And then I also worry about students with special needs and making sure, the UDL, the Universal Design for Learning, works a lot around technology and accessibility for students with different kinds of, learning profiles. And it's very, very important that we incorporate that knowledge into the internet-based learning right now.
Wonderful. And I guess we'll let Elli have our last comment, just to circle back to our final presenter. Any thoughts that have been inspired in you?
Well, what I wrote also in the chat, I think that with this crisis, as maybe with different crises, people should realize that how important relationships are, because I think, that's why I also agreed with Monica before, that relationships can hold whole systems and whole structures. And I can see that from my work. The most important coping mechanism of employees, even of not just frontline employees, also academics, are relationships. Except the unions for other matters, but I mean, relationships are important. So I think at all levels of the educational system, people should realize how important relationships are, but not forget it after the crisis. I mean, they should build on these relationships. Once the situation is normalized and children go back to school, or university students go back, of course they will go back because it's like a different kind of learning, but still we should not forget that even if they're back, relationships are important and we should build on them. And everything is so much better and so much easier with that. I think that is the same for all levels, all
Right.
levels of education. So the heads of school or whoever organizes everything, I think they should focus, create more meetings between parents and teachers. It depends on the level of education, of course, they have, but they should definitely build on that experience and also encourage more co-production.
Yeah, that's a great comment, Elli. I mean, there's so much emerging work showing that relationships are a major source of resilience from the individual to the organizational level, and that it helps to have that in place before the big crisis, because then you have that to work with, and building it, you can also build them in times of crisis, but it's really great to invest ahead of time so that you have that, that built-in capacity. So I want to just thank everyone who's participated, both our presenters and our other participants. And I learned a ton, and I think it will inform all of this work, because I know everyone on the screen is still actively working in this sector on these issues. And well done. Thank you so much.